Hello, this is Matt Pullen, aka Green Castle Block, on YouTube and Twitch. And today I wanted to go over some analysis for a common opening at lower levels known as the Englund Gambit. So, the Englund Gambit is actually known after a Swedish player named Fritz Englund. It was actually not named after the country England. So, let's let's get that straightened up right away. There's some kind of interesting history. Hello, Fleo. Kind of interesting history about the England Gambit, and I'm going to put a link in description to a good article on the subject that was written by Stefan Bucher, and that's where I got some of the material from the for this this lecture that I put together. So why is the Englund Gambit important? When I'm playing a non-level chess, like when I'm playing anonymous games on my phone, when I play d4, I think I see the Englund Gambit pretty commonly, like maybe 1 out of 6 every 6 or 7 games. And at lower levels, like when I'm watching some other streamers, at lower level chess players who play d4, I see the Englund Gambit maybe every 1 in 3, 1 in 4 games. So it's pretty common, and I think it's worth knowing about. So I mean, they tell you not to spend too much time in your developmental stages on openings, but when your opponents are playing the same things, trying to checkmate you in 8 moves, I think it's worth a little bit of time investment to understand the tactics and know how to crush those opponents immediately, game after game, so that your rating will improve and you'll get to the point where people are playing more serious openings. So what is the Englund Gambit? So if you play pawn to queen 4, that is 1d4, and your opponent answers with 1e5, this is the Englund Gambit. So black is gambiting the king pawn. This pawn is unprotected, and white is able to capture on e5. So you've gained a pawn, and there's no immediate way for black to recapture. So this is what's known as the Englund Gambit. It's generally regarded as better that black play moves such as d5 or knight f6, moves that challenge the center, because white is hoping to play with the pawn center, the big pawns, e4 and d4 side by side. So the two most fundamentally sound moves are d5 and knight f6. But this could be a tricky opening, because black is giving up a pawn to open lines for the pieces, and hoping to trick white in a very specific way. So let's examine this opening a bit. So after d takes e5, it's best to capture the pawn. I mean, you can decline the Englund Gambit if you want to, with moves like knight f3, or pawn to e3, or pawn to c3. I mean, you could play pawn to d5 if you want to, although this is a bit different. I would say pawn to d5 is a bad move, whereas e3, c3, knight f3, these are a bit passive, but they don't weaken your position. I think d5 weakens white's position. I would advise against that move. The reason is because this bishop is able to come right away to the diagonal. The pressures to f2 square. Your most sensitive square in the opening, and this diagonal can be blocked by advancing the pawn to e3 at some point. But the white pawn at e3 doesn't really mesh well with the pawn at d5. So I advise taking the pawn. You pawn takes pawn on move 2. And here, black usually plays knight to c6. This is the old theory, the old main line, and the most fundamentally sound move. You develop your knight, you put pressure on the pawn. Black is hoping to recapture the pawn at e5. There's another move here that's become popular as of late, and that is bishop to c5. And maybe we'll talk about this a bit first before we get into knight c6. There are also a couple of inferior moves that we'll talk about later if we have time, such as f6 or pawn to d6. Both of these moves allow white to make the pawn gambit permanent. In this, by taking at d6 or by taking at f6. So your black is offering to make the gambit permanent. Although, in both of those cases, I happen to advise that, white actually defends the pawn to d5, but we'll get there later. We'll get there later if possible. So other than knight to c6, what are the important moves that white needs to know about here? Well, let's say bishop c5 happens. Now this sets up a very specific trap known as the Eric Rosentrap. And how this works is, white's most fundamentally sound move is to develop the knight while putting protection for the pawn at e5. So knight f3, and now black continues with d6. So d6 allows white to exchange off the advanced pawn at e5, making the gambit permanent per se. And white should do that. There's no reason not to. Pawn takes pawn. So you've made two moves, with your pawn, making captures. And so even if this pawn is captured right away, you're going to be up a pawn. You got 4 on 3 over here. So white is going to be up a pawn permanently here. What does black have for this pawn? Well, the next move in this trap is knight e7. And it's usually pre-moved, right? Knight move develops, helps black castle. Maybe this move was done too quickly, because after all, the pawn attacks the knight at e7. So white could capture the knight for the pawn here. But this would be a dire mistake. And the reason why is because after pawn takes knight, the queen has been opened. So black plays bishop takes f2, check. And this check diverts the white king away from the defense of the queen at d1. So after king takes queen, and black's objective has been realized. The whole point of this variation with bishop c5 and knight e7 was to win white's queen. Now, fortunately, now that you know about this, after knight e7, you're not going to take at e7, right? Well, what should you do? Well, the most powerful move in this position is 5 knight c3. You develop one knight, now you develop your other knight. And this knight developing move is the strongest move in this position. What it does is it protects white's queen. So bishop takes f7, or bishop takes f2 check, rather, is not a thing, because the queen is defended. So black needs to do something about the threat of pawn takes knight. For instance, if black castles here, then takes, and now the queen is protected. So black's trick amounts to nothing. So instead, let's say black captures with bishop. Well, now we play knight to e4. So we put pressure on the bishop at d6 using the knight. And so we would like to exchange knight for bishop in order to get the bishop pair. Because keep in mind, white is still up a pawn. So in order to discourage that, the best move for black is to play bishop to b4 check. So that, c3 would not be a good move here because black is able to take d1 and white forfeits castling privileges. I mean, this is, it's possible to play this way. You're still up a pawn here, but, with the king forfeiting castling privileges, it's not as punishing as it could have been, right? I think it's better here just to play bishop d2, just to develop another piece and put the question to black's bishop at b4. So you've got 3 pieces in play. I mean, if there's an exchange here, you get a fourth, you get your queen into play as well. And white has an extra pawn. So, it's going to be quickly white playing pawn to e3, and then either, if your queen gets to get off the back rank, you can castle queenside if you want to. You can also play the bishop to d3, castle kingside. So it's a very good position. The thing you need to know is that in this position after knight e7, in the Eric Rosentrap, white plays knight c3, and this move is a solid advantage for white. It diffuses everything that black is trying to do. Like pawn takes is also possible, but again, the same move, knight e4, is good, putting the question to the bishop and also to the d6 pawn. So that is the recipe against this. You play knight c3, and then after takes, you play knight e4. So yeah, that's a sideline. Bishop to c5. The main move, and the one you need to be most prepared to face, is knight c6. Develops the knight. Black wants to take here. So white should develop, we should develop our knight. Our knight comes to f3. Now we're protecting the e5 pawn. And so here, there's a small variety of moves that black can try. The main line, the historical Englund Gambit line, is to play queen e7, adding another attacker to the e5 pawn. Other moves that happen here, there's d6, the Blackburn-Hartlub Gambit, where white can take and make the sacrifice permanent. There's f6, the Solar Gambit, which I recommend not taking and playing e4 instead. There's knight ge7, the Zilberman's Gambit. Again, we'll talk about this at the end if we have time. And there's bishop c5, the Felbecker Gambit, which also is not very good. For the same reason as other lines with this move. It's because white is able to play knight c3, threatening to bring the knight into d5 at an early stage. So let's we'll go back there if we have time. But after knight f3, you protect your pawn. Black brings the queen out. So black is threatening this pawn with 2 pieces. So the next move that white should play, you want to develop a minor piece in a way that protects your central pawn at e5. You want to maintain this pawn if you can for a long period. Force black to inconvenience themselves trying to recapture it, right? You got a pawn. You want to hold on to it if you can do so conveniently. And so bishop f4 is the main move here. You develop a piece. Now you have 2 pieces in play, and you're protecting e5 with both of them. It's also possible to play bishop g5. This is, in fact, this is the move which I personally prefer in this position. It leads to the same thing as bishop f4, because in both cases, black is going to check with the queen at b4, and the best move for white is to return the bishop to d2. That's also the case after bishop f4. The next move for black is to play queen b4, giving check, and then the bishop returns to d2. But the difference, bishop g5, it's hard for black to avoid this transposition, right? Because if you play f6, this is an attempt to get some version of the Solar Gambit, but white can just take this pawn. White eats at f6, and then knight takes f6. And again, a move which typically in the Englund Gambit is very strong. And you should remember this move if nothing else. Knight c3. Again, you develop the knight. You keep your c-pawn at home at c2, and you're aiming for the d5 square. So right now, white is thinking about playing knight d5, which would pressure the queen and the knight. Keep in mind this knight at f6 is pinned. And it would also pressure the c7 square. And anytime that the queen is moved off of d8, the c7 square is a potential issue, right? Because a knight landing on c7 would fork the black king and the black rook. So to answer this, black should play queen f7. This is the strongest move because it unpins the knight. So now the knight is managing d5. And it reveals the bishop at f8. So black, if it were black's move, they would play bishop to f4, which creates a pin on the knight at c3. And potentially, black wants to exchange at c3 and shatter the white queenside pawns. However, there's it's a very smart move that white can play here. Keeping in mind that this is black's main threat to develop efficiently and pin this knight. You play a3 here, just this little move, a3, to stop bishop from coming to b4. And this move secures a sizable white advantage because white has control over the light squares in the center. And keep in mind, white is still up a pawn. So white is able to play, with with just e3, bishop e2, castle kingside. Everything should be all right here. So that's why I like to play bishop g5. But bishop f4 is perfectly good, and it's the main theoretical move, protecting the pawn at e5. So in this position, black can consider f6 and d6. In fact, Stefan Bucher, in his article, thinks that 4d6 is objectively black's best move in this position. It's the best overall. But frankly, I don't feel that I don't feel that black has anything for this pawn. Like, consider e takes d6, right? And then you can't take this, and we don't want to unnecessarily get an isolated pawn. So queen f6 happens. This move attacks f4, and it also attacks b2. There's a convenient way to defend both of these squares, and it is queen c1. Just shift your queen over. Now this b2 pawn is guarded, the bishop is guarded, and so now black is still faced with the issue of recapturing d6. So bishop takes d6, bishop takes d6, queen takes d6, and I feel comfortable stating this is a major white plus. I mean, white is up a pawn. I don't understand what black has for the pawn, aside from, there's open files for black to put the rooks on, because black has one fewer center pawn. But yeah, there's no significant compensation here. I don't think d6 needs to be feared. So, I mean, if that's black's best, then we're doing pretty well, yeah? But there's another move, a more dangerous move that white needs to be prepared for, and that's bishop b4 check. This is what players are hoping to get when they play the Englund Gambit, because it forces white to deal with some uncomfortable problems right away. So this is attacking the bishop and the king, and queen d2 seems like an okay move. It develops the queen and protects this, but it's very bad because the queen is needed to protect a1. So this would be a serious issue because the queen is now threatening to take the rook at a1. The rook is helpless, so it needs someone to defend it on this diagonal. And if the queen defends it, well, you lose your queen to a pin. So don't do that. Bishop d2 is compulsory here. You retreat the bishop and you attack the queen. And now the main point of black playing the queen out here for check is to take b2. So the material here is technically even, right? Because black gave up their e pawn and white gave up the b pawn. But the way that you're going to get the advantage is to show that your pieces are better placed. You can develop faster. Black's queen is in an exposed position, and your superior control over the d file is another trump. So here there's a mistake here that you need to be very careful not to make. Optically, black has a queen on b2. The queen is attacking the rook. It would be nice if we could defend the rook and also attack the queen at the same time. Bishop c3 looks like a very efficient move. Actually, this is a blunder. Your bishop is protecting your rook through the queen. But white is lost if you play this move. And the answer is bishop to b4. This sets up a pin. And now black is attacking c3 with two pieces. And so the only way to address this threat and also to address the hanging rook is to play queen d2. But again, queen d2 is a liability because the queen was responsible for guarding the back rank. So black would capture at c3, and then in order to maintain protection of the rook at a1, white needs to take with the queen at c3. And now we have checkmate. Queen to c1 checkmate. Nothing can defend on d1. So this is something. This is why black has played this opening. Black wants to score a checkmate in 8 moves. So don't let this happen to you. the answer is, in this position, bishop d2 is correct. But after takes, don't play bishop c3, play knight c3. Just developing a piece, so now you have 3 pieces in play, you're protecting your rook at a1, and you're preparing to eject the black queen by playing rook to b1, and possibly developing your rook along the b file. So, there's 2 moves that black can try here to attempt to put pressure on white. The most obvious move and the theoretical main line is bishop to b4. You play bishop to b4, you're now hitting c3 with 2 pieces. Another tricky move is knight b4. Now, knight b4 threatens the fork, you're right, because black is now attacking c2 with 2 pieces, and it's defended only by the queen. So white needs to answer the threat on c2. And, the most natural way to defend rook c1, well, here black can just greedily chop on a2, and black has won a pawn. So we don't want to do that. We want to defend. Well, yeah, let's look at knight b4 first, because knight b4 is easier to refute, and the refutation is knight d4. Now, this is the only possible move, but it's a good move. Now, it's not easy to find, instinctively, because the knight at d4 is a frail defender. When I say it's a frail defender, I mean black can easily attack it with either the pawn or the bishop. And then if the knight moves, then c2 is, an issue. But although the knight on d4 is a frail defender, the knight at b4 is a frail attacker, because white can play can kick with a3, and white can also play rook to b1, gaining a tempo on the queen first. So in this position, there's a wide variety of moves that have been tried for black. I'm not going to go over them all in this video, but I'll just discuss them all quickly. Basically, the issue is white is threatening to kick the queen, and then one of these knights is going to go into b5 and threaten c7. And the threat to c7 is difficult to meet. And in addition, once the rook gets here, an idea is a3, forcing the knight to move. And the queen also kind of runs out of squares on the queen side sometimes. So let's just go over very quickly a few variations here. So the best move is to play c6. c6 takes away the squares from the white knight, and it's the most prudent way for black to continue. But white can gain an advantage with a4, and what a4 does is it cuts off the black queen from getting to a5. Why is this important? Well, I mean, suppose any move happens, like knight e7 here. White will continue with rook b1. The only square for the queen is a3, and now rook b3, and the queen is trapped. The knight protects this, rook attacks, this is guarded, this is guarded. So the point of a4 was to stop the queen from being able to retreat back to this safe dark square diagonal. So because that a4 presents a threat, it's important for black to respond to this threat. So that's why knight a6 is necessary, so that the queen can get back this way. So still, white plays rook b1 anyway, and queen a3, and now you simply play e3, right? And this is it's a significant positional advantage for white. I mean, this pawn at e5 is very strong, and can be defended easily now with f4. And these pieces are solidly placed, and now the white is able to develop the bishop, maybe even taking a6 if that becomes necessary. And white is going to be castled in a couple moves, and black is still it's not clear how black is going to complete development here. No, there might even be some some vague dark square threats involved with say a knight hopping into d6 or something. It depends on how black plays, but this is very good for white. So that's c6. That's the best move that black has. Bishop c5, attacking the knight, which is undefended. This is a more obvious try for black, but it's also bad. Rook b1, attacking the queen. Queen goes to a3, and then knight cb5. So we're attacking, and we're also attacking the c7 square, which would be a fork. So there's queen a5, right? And now it's just a very simple move, e3. So we're protecting this knight, we're protecting the knight at b5, and we're threatening pawn to a3. Pawn to a3 would attack this knight, with the knight which is pinned to the queen at a5. And there's no good answer against this threat. Keep in mind there's also two pieces attacking the knight, so the queen can't just retreat. So again, the answer here is to play, to bring this knight to b5 and then play pawn to e3, which by protecting this knight, it threatens a3. So that's bishop c5. Pawn to c5 is even more easy to refute because this pawn move is extremely weakening. The dark squares are going to be felt very soon. So first you play rook b1, always a good way to start. Queen a3, and then knight db5. Now you're moving the knight that was attacked this time. So after queen a5, which was necessary to guard c7, there's a3, just a3 right away. And now there's a big problem here, because if the knight moves, say the knight moves to a6, there is let's see. What is here? What is here? I think it's just it's just knight d5, right? We're attacking the queen with the bishop, and also converging with two knights at c7. So this queen's got to go back to d8. And here, I mean, if nothing else, I mean, white can just sit on the position, with e4, develop and castle, and you're just positionally dominating here. Right, so a6. This is another attempt, but the problem with a6 counterattacking the knight is that after pawn takes knight, the queen is attacked. So black has to try this, right? So now black is arguing that, I'm down a piece, but both of white's knights are attacked by pawns. However, white has the last laugh here with rook to a1. So now the queen is attacked. And the queen must move, and also watch the c7 square, right? So queen b6, and now knight d5. So now white is converging with two knights on the c7 square. And if this knight is captured, then knight c7 anyway, forking and winning the black queen. If black foresees that and plays queen d8, then white responds with knight d5 anyway. So you're moving one of the knights that was attacked. The other knight remains attacked, but not really, because of the unprotected rook at a8. So this knight can't be taken. You've got two knights converging on c7. Black is busted. So that's 7c5, a move that is as bad as it looks. And King d8 is actually kind of smart, because even though it's a huge concession, moving the king and forfeiting castling privileges, it does protect the c7 square. So the way to bust this is to play e4. So like this is one of the rare instances where immediate rook b1 is not best. You play e4, and there's the threat of there's the threat of trapping this queen, right? Because white is threatening to play. See, was white threatening to play here? Like after e4. See here. I think it's just. I think it's just you're threatening to kick the knight and then knight b5, and then the queen has nowhere to go in the face of rook b1. Something like this. Anyway, black has to act to rescue the queen. So queen a3, preventing pawn to a3. But then knight d5, and then you're preparing to get pressure on the d file. Queen goes to a5, then a3. Now you're kicking the knight. Knight c6, queen h5. So with queen h5, you're protecting the pawn at e5. You're also attacking the pawn at f7. And this queen is way offsides. Like, you know, we're also carrying the threat potentially of knight d5, which attacks the black queen. And then, you know, with the two knights, they're converging on c7 once again. And that's why e4 was necessary, because you want the knight that goes to b5 to be protected by the bishop, so that knight d5 can be played. Because otherwise, queen would just take knight. So yeah, against this move, king d8, not a very common move, but you should play pawn to e4, you know, taking control of b5, developing, controlling b4. And you know, there's the threat of playing a3 here. So black needs to respond. This, and yeah, you've seen what happens. Right, this resource at the end, queen h5, you know, posing a very uncomfortable question to the pawn at f7. So yeah, that's knight b4 if black threatens the c2 square right away. So now let's talk about bishop to b4. So bishop to b4 presents a threat to take c3. White's next move is obvious. Rook b1, ejecting the queen. Queen has to go to a3, or does it? So I was watching a Ben Feingold stream one time, and it may have been the only time I watched a Ben Feingold stream. Anyway, he was playing the Englund Gambit against a viewer. And in this position, instead of queen to a3, black captured, sacrificing the queen for two pieces. So queen takes c3, bishop takes. And now the only good move here is to block with knight, and now takes. So this might represent the best way to try to induce a blunder from a low-rated player. You know, make them play this middle game with two pieces against the queen. But this is obviously unsound. Like, just 10 e3. This move is a total refutation of everything black is doing. You're taking the d4 square away from black pieces. You're preparing to play bishop d3 and castle. You could also play f4, right? It's not too weakening to play with e3 and f4, because keep in mind, your remaining bishop is a light square bishop. So, you know, it makes some sense to place your pawns on dark squares to complement it. So anyway, that's queen takes c3. It's possible, but I don't think it's a very serious move. So queen a3 is more challenging. And here, the old theory is to play rook to b3, developing the rook, gaining another tempo. Queen to a5, now e4, again, occupying the center. And yeah, here it's not possible to take this pawn, because even though black has two attackers to one defender, the queen is necessary to guard the bishop at b4, right? This is hanging. And if black decides to throw this in, then bishop takes is going to protect the knight at e5. So black instead, the top theory is to play ge7 instead, trying to play knight g6 and recover the finish developing and recover the pawn this way. But now there's bishop to b5. So white says, hey, I can develop economically too. I'm going to put the bishop on an active square, get ready to castle on the next move. So let's say black challenges this bishop with a6. Well, white is willing to exchange bishop for knight in the spirit of economical developing. I'm going to take, you have to retake, and then I get castled. And I question your use of the tempo a6. No, and like like the Spanish opening, the Ruy Lopez, right? And like the Spanish, black should take this way in order to get development for the light square bishop. And here white can castle, and this is a significant plus for white. And so this is the old theory. The old theory sort of ended here in this position. It says, yeah, white is much better. But there's some other moves that black can try. Black has some variety that they can mix up their moves a bit. And yeah, so the new theory, I say relatively new theory, what's considered to be better is that after rook b1 and queen a3, instead of continuing to chase the queen with rook b3, knight d5, just immediate knight d5. This is the hot stuff now. And black has yet to find a theoretically satisfactory answer to knight d5. So right now, this bishop is attacked 3 times, and it's only defended twice. So the only 2 moves that black has are you play bishop a5, which is a bit obscure. I'm actually not going to go into this for in the interest of length for this video. But yeah, bishop to a5. If you see this move, the correct move is to play rook to b5, developing and threatening the bishop at a5. The bishop which is necessary to defend the pawn at c7. So in this position, the best move for black is to play bishop takes. And essentially, white has gotten in the move rook b5 for free. Now, is this a good move for white to have or not? It's debatable. But let's not go into that in this video. It's all you need to know is that line is also very good for white. So what happens here after knight d5? We're threatening this c7 square. We're also threatening the bishop. So bishop takes d2. Queen takes d2. All right, this is fairly natural, right? So now, how do you deal with the threat to c7? I mean, the best way for black to attempt to continue, because queen a5 is not possible, white would just exchange queens and take c7, is to take here. Now, this ignores c7, but it sets up a counter threat to the rook at b1. And here the rook, white should move the rook. So just move it to d1. So now there's still this threat, this powerful threat on the table of knight takes c7 check. So how does black deal with this? Well, the only way to defend this pawn currently is to play king d8. And now the king moved over to d8 so that he could defend c7. But now the f7 square has been abandoned, hasn't it? So let's jump in there with the other knight. So now this knight is hitting f7. This knight is hitting c7. So how is black going to defend the f7 square? Notice how black is undeveloped here. They've invested development in this queen, which is over here at a2. But that's the only pawn that they've moved. There's a lot of pieces not doing anything to help black right now. So I mean, yeah, white has to finish their development too, but white has got the active pieces. This, potentially very strong d file. You got 2 knights that are, aggressively staring into black's position. So here, knight h6, protecting f7, is a try. See, other tries. Well, knight takes e5. It's pretty easy to see how this is busted, right? You play queen c3. You're attacking the knight, which is hanging. Behind the knight is the g7 pawn, also hanging. Your knight and queen are collaborating on the c7 pawn, also hanging. So black is not able to solve all the problems in this position. This is just 1-0. So instead, a little more resilient is knight h6. And now there's a very strong move in this position. So you guys can actually see it. It's pawn to e6. Because, given time, I don't know, maybe black unravels this, but the position looks pretty bad. But after e6, this is, this is setting up, some serious threats. I mean, white is just trying to take on f7. And, well, I mean, what's the answer here? I mean, this you can't take this way. The d file can never be opened because white has got knight b4, giving check to the king, attacking the black queen, simply winning. So the d pawn cannot move. See, the f pawn perhaps can move, right? But again, you got this. You got knight takes e6, and now this knight can't be touched. Again, because of the same reason. Knight b4 check and taking the queen. So the king's got to move, and then there's the rook at a8 is lost. So that is end of game. So instead, black can try bypassing with f6, right? But this is also busted because of e7 check. So this is pretty brutal. So the problem with knight takes pawn. Well, first of all, king over just loses to knight c7, right? Your rook at a8 is falling. So it takes here, and then you have knight to e6 check. So again, this pawn, although not technically pinned, you can never really do this because again, there's knight b4 giving check, and the queen is dropping. So, ironic that black is losing all these games because of the position of the queen at a2. Anyway, so this knight can't be taken. Got to go over here, right? And so now it's the pawn is threatening to take the knight here. So white has to be a little bit cautious. And the right move is to, you can take c7 with either knight. But you should probably take it with the knight that black is threatening to take. So you take it this way. And then, well, yeah, black is stuck with a tough choice. Right, so if, you see, either one of these moves, like if king f7 is played, or if, well, yeah, if king f7 is played, you probably just take e7, followed by taking a1. And the same thing for d8. Well, you take, see here, this is attacked. It's attacked twice, it's defended twice. So I think here you just take a8. Right? Because if takes, just queen takes. And if king f7, yeah, presumably it's just see this. Yeah, again, the knight at d5 is not truly threatened, so just take here. So, yeah, that's how we bust. That's how we bust that main line with bishop takes d2. So yeah, that's the main line of the Englund. Let me check on the time that we got going on here. And I guess we could look at a little bit, of ins and outs here, right? I mean, we could consider bishop a5. I think maybe that's just a line for you to research on your own if you're curious. Like, usually black is not going to get this far. They will have played a serious mistake prior to this, and the main move is here. C takes, queen takes, king d8. I think here, like in the line with the rook at b1, the correct move was to play knight g5. Here it's actually to play e4. And so again, you got this threat of knight g5 or even queen g5 and taking g7, right? So h6 to take away that square, and then h4. So I'm just going to go over the what the line is. So h4, the objective is to take away this move and prepare a very strong square at f4 for this knight. So b6, again, trying to develop and maybe take advantage of the state of this rook at b5, right? Bishop c4, developing a piece, preparing to castle, and getting ready, strengthening white's position, getting ready to attack the king. So queen f8. Again, bishop c4. I think the issue here was that I think there's an attempted queen trap, like with rook b3. Or no. What is c after bishop b4? Yeah, so I mean the main line is to play queen f8, knight f4. Again, take advantage of the square that we cultivated for the knight, by playing h4. And so now in g6 might be a little weak. e6 is a concern as well. Knight g7. We get castled, bishop a6. So this is black's attempt to exploit the rook that's out at b5. And now white plays e6. So now obviously threatening mate, and we can't take this way because of knight check, forking and winning the black queen. Again, take advantage of the fact that white is very strong on the d file. So king c8, unpinning the d pawn. Now we got e takes d7 check, king b7, rook c5. So this is the official refutation, like where the line ends. So rook c5, what this move does is it moves the rook while protecting the bishop, because right now, if the rook moves just to some square, then black has bishop takes bishop. So the rook moving to c5, this was controlled by the pawn, and this was controlled by the knight. So white kind of had a problem with this bishop at c4, but white solves it with rook c5. And the reason that this is solved is because bishop takes bishop is just an exchange. Like if bishop takes, then rook takes, and white has a crushing advantage. But what if pawn takes rook? Well, pawn takes rook. There's mate, because we start with rook b1, and keep the pawn controls c8, so the black king cannot go back. So knight b4 only move. Rook takes knight, pawn takes, queen takes, giving check. And after the only sensible move, king c6, there's knight e5 checkmate. Very nice. So yeah, that is the refutation. In case you wanted to see it, the main line of bishop a5. Now there's a few moves in there which I don't completely remember the justifications for, but I mean White's play was kind of simple, right? You just want to open the center, get your pieces out, and look for opportunities to attack the black king in the center, with pawn to e6. That's what happens in that line. So other moves that we can consider. How are we doing on time? All right, so we like 55 minutes. See, I hope I can upload a video of this length. So bishop e7, queen e7 has happened. What are other moves than queen e7? Well, I refer to the Blackburn Hartlub Gambit with d6. So after this, I think that white should capture this pawn. You know, trades, and white is up a pawn, but I mean, black does have a developed bishop, which is nice. So e3, pawn to e4 is also a possible move, but e3, bishop g4, bishop e2, you know, queen e7, and then knight d4. This is a good move to keep in mind, right? The moving of this knight again to d4 and exposing, you know, tension between these bishops. You know, also introducing tension, you know, to this knight at c6. So white wants to exchange some pieces because white is up a pawn, and black is arguing that black's, you know, pieces are going to come flowing to white's king side, and black is going to launch an attack with the extra open lines. But you know, white, I think white should be solid over there. White wants to seek some exchanges of pieces, and this is a nice maneuver to remember. The knight going to d4. Relocating and seeking to exchange for this knight at c6. So that's an idea there against the Blackburn Hartlub. So f6 is the Solar Gambit, where black would like to take this way, you know, and then fill the center with d5. So we've got an open an extra open file caused by the missing f pawn, and black hopes to develop in simple fashion, you know, by the bishop moving to c5 or d6, and you castle. This bishop moves out, the queen moves somewhere, and you try to attack white's king side, right? I feel that white is served best actually by declining this gambit. Like instead of taking it at f6, I would play e4, right? And now knight takes e4. Knight takes e is just very bad because takes, and queen h5 check. So instead, black is taking with pawn. And now you play bishop c4. This bishop is very strongly positioned on this diagonal, right? It's not clear how black is going to castle kingside. So after d6, knight g5, trying to jump on f7. There's knight h6, kind of the only way to guard that square, right? Because black doesn't have d5, because white is strong on the d file. You know, we're attacking this 3 times. So now, again, 7a3. Now this move comes up again, pawn to a3, but this time the goal is to preserve this bishop on the diagonal. And again, ask black, how do you intend to castle here? So without the move a3, black could consider playing knight a5, trying to hunt down this bishop. But after knight h6, a3, preserving the bishop on this diagonal, is very strong. So this is not a position where white is... it's not a position where white is up a pawn, but you've got a very clear strategic advantage because of this diagonal. All right, so that's 3f6. 3 knight g7. This is the Zilberman's Gambit. And so this gets played sometimes. The objective is to go knight g6 and attack this with 2 knights. The best way to play against this, I feel, is again 4 knight c3. Very, very familiar looking move and strong. So the point is that this knight's going to go away to g6, right? And when this knight moves, then the d5 square becomes available. So knight g6, bishop g5. So this is a developing move. It puts question to the queen at d8. So the most efficient move is for black to develop with bishop e7, right? Well, here, white just exchanges the bishop. Queen takes, and now knight d5. So we're attacking. We're also pressuring the c7 square. So this queen goes back to d8 to guard c7. And now white plays queen d2. So here, neither black knight can capture e5. That is an important thing to know here. So if either of these knights captures e5, white exchanges, and queen c3. Again, this queen attacks the knight at e5. The pawn at g7 is also hanging, and the queen and the knight are cooperating for the attack at c7. So again, we've seen this before in this opening, where the knight gets lured to e5, and then there's this queen c3 idea to take advantage of the lack of the knight at f6 and weakness of g7. So this is that's the Zilberman's gambit. Now there may be better moves for black in there, but that's just a very basic concept that white should keep in mind. The queen d2, queen c3. White should be comfortably better in that opening. So let's just so two knight c6. Knight c6 on move 2. Again, we already discussed other moves. We discussed the Eric Rosentrap with 2 bishop c5. 2 f6. I feel this move is it can be pretty easily disposed of. It's sort of like the Solar Gambit, but not really. Again, I feel that white should respond with e4. This pawn can't be taken because of queen h5 check. So knight c6 gets played, and then bishop c4. So again, here after pawn takes, white can just transpose to the Solar by playing knight f3. There might be sharper moves like knight c3 or a3 even, but yeah, I think just knight f3 here, just transposing to the line that we just saw, seems pretty good. So instead, after bishop c4, black can try this move. Knight takes e5. But then bishop b3, simply retreating the bishop, maintaining control over this diagonal. This is, white can just develop normally and claim a large advantage here. It's not clear how the pawn at f6 is helping black's position. But you can play knight c3, you can blow this knight away with f4, play knight f3 and castle. White just, control over the d file, control over this diagonal. It looks very nice. So that's 2 f6. There's also 2 d6, where this could be reached via a Philidor type situation as well. But see, I think knight f3, and again, this capture is not advisable because white can exchange queens and then take at e5. So black can try this move, bishop to g4. But then white has this response, bishop to g5. And this is quite, this is quite annoying for black. Seeing as if we block with the bishop there, that white can just exchange bishops and then take d6. It's this is a nice sequence to maneuver. Or you could always just take d6, right? I mean that's an extra pawn too, and it's transposed to the to the blackbird heart level. It takes here, and then I don't know, knight f3, trying to play with e3, bishop e2, knight d4 ideas. So yeah, this has been an examination of the Englund Gambit, where after d4, black responds e5, and then d takes e5, knight c6. So we've looked at the complexities of queen e7, intending queen b4 check. That labyrinth. So yeah, this has been a video about the Englund Gambit, and I hope that you learned about this and can apply that knowledge if your opponents try this against you, and hopefully you'll continue to beat your opponents until you get to a point where you're playing people who have learned better and don't try this anymore. So yeah, thank you for watching, and check out my Twitch channel, Green Castle Block, on Twitch where we do a couple